Hello for everybody joining us today. We are back at the Educate AI Readiness webinar series teaching room, and today we've got Dr. Carmel Kent, who is Educate's Head of Data Science and Research Fellow at UCL's Institute of Education, going to be speaking on step 4 of the AI Readiness Ethical AI Framework for educational businesses. And this session is again on data and collation and collection and cleaning of new data for educational businesses. We have a guest today, Hannah Pickard from OSTC, a global trading and derivatives company, and she works for Zishi, which is Zishi Cornerstone, which is a part of OSTC. She is the head of education there. So Carmel, I'm just letting in the last couple of people. When you are ready, please feel free to share your screen, which you already have, and take it away when you are ready. For everybody else joining us, again, as usual, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat, and when we get to the breaks, I will read them out. You can send them. You can send them to the whole group, or you can send them to me privately, or you can send them to the speaker privately. That's fine too. Okay, Carmel, when you're ready.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Roland. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. We are at step 4 in our ethical framework, which, as Rose always said, is all about ethical readiness for AI. The last webinar was aimed at school, universities, and teachers, and today we would like to be aimed more at educational businesses. Okay, I'll take you through what step 4 is all about. So since data is so core to understanding opportunities and challenges, and specifically for AI, and since we already talked about the data that you do have and what we do with the data that we do have, we will think today about what kinds of data we do not currently have access to and how do we collect it. So the webinar is for EdTech companies who are asking 3 basic questions. First, when do I start collecting data? Second, do I need to have a specific AI application in mind to think systematically about data collection? And third, how do I collect new data? And the answers are yesterday, no, and carefully. Those are the short answers. So if you are seeking just short answers, please go enjoy the rest of the afternoon. For those who are still with us, we will prompt you to look at yourself, your business, through a data and AI lens so that you can develop what we call an AI mindset and generally make better decisions about where and how to leverage AI. As in every webinar until now, we will remind you how different and complementary are human and artificial intelligence. We will get a bit deeper to the distinction in the next webinar when we will talk about the AI techniques to be applied. But we will always remind all of us how imperative it is that we take our AI journey armed with the understanding that a key for such a successful journey lies in this relationship between human and artificial intelligences, and understanding what each side do best and how they can best work together to make sure that we support well our educational system. And as Roland said, I'm so happy that we are joined today by Hannah Pickard. She's the head of education in OSTC and Zishi. Hannah is a very experienced trader, manager, and instructor, and she will discuss with us her perspective on step 4. And who we are, so from right to left, Ben Debule, Anissa Moini, Professor Rose Lacking, Mutlu Kukurova, Ali Shordi, myself, Carmel Kent, and Ibrahim Bashir. And we all have backgrounds in the intersection of AI and education, human-computer interaction, learning sciences, and data sciences. Our 7 steps framework for those joining us today for the first time is called ETHICAL, the acronym, which is actually the cross-cutting theme, making sure that all of these steps would be implemented ethically. And so even if you don't intend to build your business around AI, using AI mindset or getting ready to use data in your business is always a good strategy when done right, of course. The 3 steps already discussed in previous webinars are first, educate, enthuse, excite about building an AI mindset within your community, because it is so important that as many people as possible in your organization would be on board, open to this change, taking part of that. Second, tailor and hone the particular challenges you choose to focus on, because it is so essential that we know what are the problems that we want to prioritize when we're using AI. And third, identify and collect data. And fourth, which is what we are about to speak today, is about new data relevant to your chosen focus. Why collect data? We might always ask why to even collect data, which is a good question. And we need always to ask ourselves this question, not just collecting data for the sake of collecting. So we all know that humans are complex. We are a complex creature, and so do educational constructs. So every educational construct that you can think about, like, learning, engagement, making progress, reflecting, collaborating, overcoming obstacles, and even construct like empathy, charisma, intuition. I think it was Roland that mentioned that in one of our previous webinars. They're all very complex constructs. It's not even clear to us humans. If I will ask you, how would you define any of those? It's not very straightforward for us to even define it ourselves. So what is the machine's chance to be able to have any insight into those? It's very, very important that we understand that computational models are all approximation and will ever be just that. So, okay, should we all again go home and forget about AI? Absolutely not, of course not. We just need to understand that in order to do and to use AI better. The thing about such complex constructs that we might want to understand better or measure is that you think you understand them and you think you already have a good enough picture of those constructs. But when you look from a different angle, and often in life, as we all know, there are few of those different angles, you might see a completely different image. It is the variety of the angles, the variety and the wealth of the data sources, the data modalities, which will enable us the holistic lens of ourselves, of our students, of our staffs, this holistic image. So why is data important? Even way before applying AI, even before predicting, classifying, or whatever you want to do with AI, from just visualizing and reflecting on a good wealth of collected data, you will usually be able to get such a better understanding of your business. And indeed, many of the projects that we are involved with benefit from a very good understanding from just visualizing the data in some way. And if you are into AI, the key point is that AI application will only be as good as the quality and quantity of the collected data, which is much more strong than even the quality and the quantity of the algorithms themselves. So the data is core. Data is the main competitive differentiator when it comes to AI. And you can look at AI companies like Google's DeepMind, for example. So we always ask ourselves, what data do we already have? What data we don't have, but is essential to understanding our business or the core educational construct that is so essential to our business. So, for example, if a challenge is in recruiting tutors, for example, and all we have is a dry CV, which provides us with their qualification and experience, we might be seeking for the data to complete this picture. It might be audio data to pick up their charisma or affective traits. It might be surveys to understand their pedagogical approaches. It might be video recording of a trial lesson to track their feedback mechanisms, eye movement, or anything like that. How soon should I start collecting new data? And do I even need to have an AI idea in mind to start collecting this data? One thing to keep in mind when building your company's strategy is that making a real impact out of AI requires much longer time than we usually tend to anticipate. And why is that? Well, first, because AI is such a greedy and a hungry creature. It is true that we cannot get away without high quality data, but machine learning specifically is based on a sufficient quantity of historical data and can hardly work without it. So some sufficient amount of data needs to be in place ahead of even starting. And second, a data-supported company's culture need to embrace experimentation, questioning, pivots, learning, and failures when embarking on an AI proof of concept, product, whatever, especially when circumstances change so dramatically as the COVID has caused us. Succeeding in AI requires us to really commit to an agile culture, agile experimentation. The difference between mediocre and excellent AI strategies is that mediocre strategy, you would find yourself investing in a very naive way with disparate or anecdotal projects, tooling or infrastructure. The excellent AI strategies are those that data access is created collaboratively and not in silos. And so does the modeling and then the use and the design of the data. But of course, most EdTech companies are not there yet, which is exactly what we are here to talk about. So the next question would be, okay, I want to collect data, so what would I collect and how would I collect the data? A typical organization includes many systems that can serve us as data producers. Whatever these systems were designed for, it usually are not designed for this task in mind, for data collection. They are usually also not coordinated to produce the same format of data. Moreover, they are usually not designed to produce data in a format needed by any specific modeling technique in mind. So a substantial amount of data analytics project time would typically be spent on collecting, cleaning, integrating several data sources that are produced by several data producer of systems such as those. So we have no choice but to bring our data to a trustable and reliable level of format before we do anything with it, even just for simple reporting, way before AI. So I can talk about two very high-level approaches for data collection, top-down and bottom-up, as in everything. So the top-down approach, which we usually recommend, means that you already know what describes your business or what are your main challenges. And you audit what data you already have, you find what data you can use from any other resources, and then you design your data collection around that. So for example, if we are all about engagement in online learning, like many of us do after the COVID, we might want to collect data about attendance, camera on and off, time on task, submission on time, discussions, online discussion with peers, indications of reading and viewing material. If we are about learning outcomes, we might think about collecting quizzes and grades. If we want to trace effect, we might want to look at sentiment in chat or mails, appearances of distress terminology, facial expression, audio analysis, whatever. So any of those constructs, we just need to look at what would be mostly relevant to them. What do we need to be in particular careful of? And that is why I added this tend to falling person here. We need to think holistically of things that we may need as we go ahead, and not to be too stuck of my current challenge, because we must remember that AI is this greedy and hungry creature, and we need to have as holistic data angles as possible. I could not stress that more and more. So even if you do have a challenge in mind, you need to think ahead, even if you're not sure what you're going to do with that data. The bottom-up approach, what if you are not yet sure of what you want to do yet, but you do want to make sure that you get ready? So you still want to audit what data you already have. You want to have a strategy about what is that your business is or is changing to be, again, thinking about COVID. And you design your data collection around that. So for example, think about what we call dark data. Okay? Dark data is the data that organizations typically collect, process, and store during their routine business activities. The idea is that you probably want to collect as much data as you can afford for as long as you can while mitigating risk. Actually, we assume that data might prove valuable, but most of the time we do not know when precisely. With the maturation of AI techniques, that time when the dark data becomes useful may be very soon. Another point that is very, very important for me to stress is that data collection needs to be built in your product design from day one. In other words, every time a user engages with your product or service, a good practice will be to think very carefully about a safe collection of that interaction, so that we can make future usage of our product in a more informed way, and therefore better. And this requires significant architecture. I mean, when I say architecture, I mean technical, legal, data security, everything in place. But it is key to maximizing the value of any system that we are building. What do we need to be careful here? In the bottom-up approach, the risk is much higher because we are not sure what we're going to do with the data. We must be extra careful about not collecting just for the sake of collection. We need to adhere to all ethic guidelines before starting collecting. So think about GDPR, etc. Another risk in this approach is that the value of our data set is more often defined by the context in which it is collected. So try to document the context of the collection of the data as well. Data without context is a huge risk later in modeling. Which is better? To be honest, most of the time we recommend doing both and be double careful. Okay, so we can roughly talk about two kinds of data collection, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Automatic data collection on the left, data is generated automatically from our applications, from our systems, log data, sensors, etc. It is cheap and effective method for gathering large amounts of data, assuming that you have designed, again, those systems with data collection in mind, which is quite a strong assumption sometimes. And the data, as opposed to the design method, can be more current and less biased and less dirty than manually collecting data. But it requires, again, initial good design, large storage, and it is usually less adequate for addressing qualitative needs such as opinion, perceptions, feelings, etc. And design data collection on the right, such as surveys, interviews, focus groups, those are designed for specific purpose to collect specific information usually. So we need to think very carefully about the sample of the people we collect data from to not bias our data. And the time frame of collection needs to be carefully designed to have a very good context, and human interaction of the data collector and the subject need to be carefully thought through. Design data collection usually enables us more focused, rich, and specific data collection, and it can be very easily refined and adjusted if needs to be, unlike usually automatic data collection. On the other hand, it's very time consuming. I mean, online service can be a cost-effective solution for that. And it is challenging to gather large data sets, which we usually need for AI, which would be clean and structured, etc. So for example, think about open questions and how much work unstructured text needs to have before it can be trustfully used by AI. And of course, again, those combination between automated data sources, data collection, and design data collections, combination of data sources, data modalities is usually better. AI cannot work in silos. So let's take an example. A company's website offers online educational resources or games for primary school pupils to aid in them in learning math or English. 2 years after the launch, the company wants to understand better how pupils are using their games or resources. Specifically, they want to know what is the relationship between students' grade and their learning experience and the sequence that they choose to take those games, successfully or unsuccessfully. Or, for example, they want to know whether spaced learning in terms of spacing time is better than long consecutive learning time. That is in order for them to be able to suggest an optimal, or what we call adaptive, sequence of games to pupils according to their grades and learning outcomes. So what kind of data would we like to collect in that example? So for example, we would probably want web analytics, which is an automatic data collection of the exact time visitors are accessing each game and the duration of time they spent in each game or each resource. We would like to have average score of each pupil on the games. We would like probably to have their math or English scores before or after using the systems, and we would probably want to complement that with some interviewing of their teachers, for example, or the parents. Now, this combination of automatically and design data collection method can be very useful, and each data source, but each data source alone doesn't make a lot of sense. It is this connecting of data sources and data collection methods that makes most sense. Okay, now just before going to discuss with Hannah, I would like to mention very briefly some of the main challenges that are faced by data collecting organizations. That is for those of you who weren't yet convinced that it's nothing to be taken lightly. So we all know how messy and noisy data is, and it's not just that I chose a pile of laundry to demonstrate that. We know that 70%, 80% sometimes of the time spent on AI project will be spent on cleaning, structuring, collecting, organizing the data so that it could be useful and trustworthy when used in AI. And here are some of the main cleansing challenges that we would be seeing. Now, clean data is not enough. Data also needs to be fair, and fair stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So, and otherwise, it is really of little benefit at best, or worse, will simply lead us to poor decisions. If the data is not standard, if it is simply locked away, or if the API to access it is changing every Monday and Thursday, we would be chasing our tail with this project for a long time. And again, I must stress again, AI won't work if your data is rigidly siloed. Last but not least, there are many potential biases, if you can see some examples on the left, that can occur with an uncareful data collection, such as representation bias and measurement bias, and many other examples that you can see here. On the other hand, we must remember that human decision-making is, when it's not supported well by data and evidence, is subjected to not less cognitive biases, which you can see here on the right side. If you can see, it's a bit small, but biases like the framing effect, the availability biases, and etc. We must remember that there is no such thing as a completely unbiased data set. But at the same time, there is no such thing as a completely unbiased mind. So this is exactly why we need to think smartly about using both human and artificial intelligence to safeguard one another's biases. One classic way of gaining trust is through transparency, accountability, and empowerment. So transparency when building our systems so that people can see exactly what we are doing, what kind of data is collected, etc. Accountability, obviously, because we need to take responsibility for everything we are doing, and empowerment because we actually putting people, human beings, in charge. Okay, so I'm very, very happy to invite Hannah to join us today. As I said, Hannah is the head of education at OSTC, and we are very lucky to be working with her in the last 2 years, developing AI projects and capabilities in Zishi. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Carmel. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion today.
We're really happy to have you. Can we start by, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your role as head of education, some of the challenges that you met on the way?
Yeah, sure. So my background, I'm based in South Wales in the Swansea office of OSTC. I started off as a trainee, so I really went through the learning experience within OSTC, learned how to trade the financial markets the first 3 years, just spending my time trading, engaging with financial markets. I then moved on into a office manager position, so I was more involved in the recruitment, the training of new traders coming through the business. And now I'm happy to say that since the creation of Zishi 2 years ago, I really am focused full time on building our training tools, resources, how we really augment individuals. And obviously Zishi Adaptive, our project with UCL, has been a massive part of that work over the last 2 years.
Great. So as we are discussing today, step 4 of the ethical framework, which is about collecting new data, and as you were and still are heavily involved in this process in Zishi, I was wondering if you can tell us a bit the process from your perspective, and what kind of good things were you revealing when doing that? What were the main challenges that you can point us?
Well, to me, I mean, I still very much so am, but being a novice at AI, the thought of how will this work within OSTC and Zishi as a project was at first slightly overwhelming, but when it got down to the process of collecting our data and you walking us through and helping us understand how it was going to end up as almost an end product, it was a really interesting project to be involved in. I've always loved a spreadsheet, I'm that way inclined, but thinking about collecting data and marrying it up, different data sets, different data sources, it was certainly a big task for us to tackle within OSTC. We had a raft of data. I'm going to use the Goldilocks scale for lack of a better one, but we had some topics of data where there was just too much of it. We couldn't really comprehend what to do with certain parts of it, and that was specifically our trading data. We record every click of the mouse. Too little data. There was aspects such as some of the risk reporting data was probably a bit lacking. We didn't have much in terms of the well-being of our traders, and also some of the employment data was patchy in places too. So certainly areas that were a challenge in that respect. And then things like finance data, we probably had just the right amount of. So it was interesting from certainly my perspective to see within our business really discovering how much we had in some areas, and again, how little we had in some others. And then obviously working with you to structure it and try and come to some sort of a better understanding really of what the data was telling us. It felt somewhat ignored, I think, beforehand on reflection, and still probably is to an extent today, but there's obviously still work we can do.
Yeah, I think that's probably I've met so many organizations sitting on those mountains of treasures, and OSTC is really a good example of that, because those dark data that you were collecting just as a routine activity for, I don't know, for regulation or just because, and it is now being used. It's really nice to see that. And as you mentioned the thing, from my point of view, Hannah, you as a domain expert, both in the domain of trading and both in the domain of education, you are so and you are so instrumental to this process, because Hannah was actually handing us the whole support throughout all the time. So all the tacit knowledge sitting all there in Hannah's head, we actually needed that. We couldn't do anything without it. Anyone that can say that, AI and machine learning can work so blindly on the data set without actually understanding the semantics of the expert it's actually not true. And I think your expertise actually gave life to this data, and that still is. So
thank you. It was a journey of discovery for me as well. There was certain aspects of data I didn't even know existed within OSTC, and then had to work with the knowledge I already had and with others to understand it further in order to be able to explain it to the UCL and your team. So,
and I think we also had some times when looking at the data made you realize some new things, like for example with the whole idea of yours of the aggressive trading and passive trading. Can you give us some example, even without going into details of the trading, of such times when the data itself gave you some new insights?
Yeah, sure. So trading data for us, if you can imagine, every time a trader clicks the mouse, that activity is being recorded to the nth degree. And we always knew it was there in the background, but I think we never really consciously thought about the answers it could maybe be providing us with, certainly in terms of supporting new traders as they develop, and really mentoring people in the process of establishing their career with us. The aggressive passive one that you mentioned there is a particularly interesting one, because for every order you submit to the market, you can label it as either a passive order or an aggressive order, i.e. you're either going to get completed on that trade immediately as an aggressive order, or it's more of a passive where you're informing the market, I would like to buy or sell at that price, but I'm willing to wait and be selective for that price. I might never achieve the fill, but I'm going to sit here passively and wait and see if I do get it. And that different mentality behind each trade is something we've never really studied in terms of studied it analytically. We might have looked at a trader and, having worked with them day in, day out, have an understanding of what their risk personality was like, but never really been able to put statistics to it and be able to explain it in that sense. So just specific fields that sat within our trading data, it's led us to ask ourselves the questions on, can we use this to help individuals improve their trading activity?
Roland, do we have any questions at all?
No, not for the moment, Carmel, but
Okay.
yeah, if you want to carry on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get some more.
There was one thing I was actually going to mention in terms of data collection and the process itself. So looking back at the start of the project, certainly for me, and I think for a lot of other people, when you talk about data in this day and age, a lot of people jump to data security. And for us, one of the sort of barriers we had to overcome was, with the amount of data that existed within OSTC, or does exist, I should say, within OSTC, within each department, is creating almost a central collation point for it, and reassuring other people within the business that, you know, we're using this data for an ethical purpose, you know, there's good intention behind it. And I think that breaking down that assumption that data security is the focal point every time was something for us to overcome. It's, you know, data is very valuable and that's why people protect it, but you have to think about it as an asset, I believe, as a business. How can you use it to improve your business outcome, not just think about how you protect it? I might get in trouble for saying that, but
no, I think you just mentioned two such very, very important points. One of them is this balance between keeping my data secure, hugging my data, as we call it, and actually using it for something good. And the other point that you mentioned was, you mentioned few data sitting in few departments and few stakeholders around the organization. And I wanted to ask whether, how do you feel about who needs or which departments or how many people from around the organization needs to be taking part of that? Is it something that could be carried out very locally in one department, or do we need to have other people in the process? And if we do, how do we do that? Because I mean, naturally, and as you mentioned, there would be some resistance from different parts, either because of, you know, security, privacy, because of fear that we are going to be replaced by machines. We don't really know what you do behind all those worksheets, and might it be bad for me? What do you think about reactions from around the company and how to better deal with that?
Sure. So from my experience, it was in some respects a case of not having too many cooks in the kitchen. So although you wanted to have representation from every department, you wanted to have the best knowledge within the business on what data existed and why. You wanted to make sure that you were as streamlined, I think, as possible in collecting it, but also maintaining that level of quality. In terms of reassuring people and being open and honest about how we're using the data. It was really just about making sure that there was an open channel of communication about what the Zishi Adaptive was and is trying to achieve. We made sure to anonymise all of our data as much as we could. Obviously there's a level within the business that still needs to have full exposure to the details, but to whatever degree you could anonymise, we would. And I think for us, certainly as as a results-driven business, we made it clear to our traders that we were using this data to help them improve. For us, AI is not about replacing traders with computers. We believe that a human element within financial markets will always reap reward. And for us, it's about using AI to augment the individual, to help, help in recruiting them, even at that early stage, but certainly through training, mentoring them. We want to augment the individual. We want to use AI to support them, not to replace them. And I think once you make that your basis point, everybody's willing to listen a bit more. And then it's just about being very open and transparent about what your exact plans for the data are, how you'll move it about, and again, how you plan to anonymise when it's appropriate.
Yeah, that's really that's a really good point. Just thinking, you are already sorry about 2 years inside this process. Do you have any kind of advice of what to not do, or what to be careful of from an EdTech company that wants to start the process of collecting data and thinking about AI and everything about those risks and
for us, obstacles like transferring the data securely, so making sure you seek the best advice available for that. Other things we had challenges with were language, not just in terms of spoken language. Obviously, as a global company, we had data recorded in different languages, but also computer language. So some of the software we use interpreting the coding language behind that. And really sort of incomplete pieces of data. So when we factored in all of these challenges and worked out how to try to overcome them, there was different tacts. Some of it was quite time consuming in trying to fill in the missing pieces where it was available. But nonetheless, I think it was important to give us that balance of data to make sure that certain areas of the business, in terms of geographically, certain traders weren't over or under represented. I think that in terms of suggestions, I'd say that you will always understand your data better than anybody else. It really surprised me when you think about all the external softwares and things like that you come to rely on as a business. Because we use that software every day to trade, we, I think in a lot of respects, understand its use better than the people who designed it.
Right.
And therefore, the millions of lines of trading data that we had and we were sitting on, when we started to unpick it and what each field meant, it was, number one, reassuring, but also number two, quite enlightening to discover that we really did understand it a lot better than I think we assumed we did at first glance. And we didn't need as much external translation, if you like, from software providers and things to help us understand that aspect. So just the reassurance, I think, that you will always understand your data probably better than anybody else.
That's so true. Yeah. Roland, do we have any questions?
Well, just one from Dorothy, but I wonder really if Hannah's sort of already touched on this, I think sort of twice really, just asking how we reassure employees about the safety of their data. But I feel like Hannah's already sort of touched upon that a little bit.
Yeah.
I suppose I have a question in terms of, but it's sort of at a slightly smaller scale. But yes, sorry, Dorothy is just she wants that. So I just wondered, for companies that aren't necessarily, sort of thinking of employing AI, we do obviously have a large network of companies that are sort of, in their infancy or sort of wondering about it, but maybe not willing to sort of admit, that they would require it. So at what point does it become obvious for a company that they're thinking, actually, we do need AI techniques in order to sort of maximize our business model? Like, is there a sort of a particular kind of light bulb moment that occurs for people?
I don't think for us it was a light bulb moment. I think perhaps it's the trading mindset. You're always looking to make that extra bit of profit in a trade. You're always looking to find that extra bit of improvement. And for us as a business, we felt, because the data we had was such a massive asset and there was such a huge amount of it, it kind of felt obvious that there was next steps to be taken with that. And there were certain things within the business that we really wanted to improve on, things like the turnover of staff. The training process was quite laborious in terms of very much a trainer in the room, and the mentoring of that wasn't very well recorded, so it wasn't supporting us in the long term for that trader's development. So for us, it kind of felt like the obvious next step, mainly, as I say, because of the amount of data we had. So yes, that would be my answer to that.
Thanks, Hannah. And can I ask as well, this is sort of a question that I had from one of the previous webinars on sort of data and consent. And I just wonder, sort of, previously I was going to sort of ask it in like a schools sort of setting, but I think it would work for a business as well. If you were sort of conducting, research into employees' sort of feelings around, the implementation of AI, or if you were actually gathering data in order to sort of streamline some of your, like your HR processes with any kind of, AI, your recruitment or your interviewing with any kind of AI techniques. What happens if you're sending out sort of, surveys or something like that, and you actually gather information from your staff, inadvertently with sort of a survey that sort of via direct questioning, they wouldn't actually consent to give. So in terms of stuff like maybe, if you're asking them about sort of, their mental health, their well-being, or sort of, like a sort of gender or questions, what happens if they give you some information that you don't necessarily wouldn't ask for directly? How do you process that extra information that you've got? Do you sort of get rid of it? Do you store it? Do you raise it with them sort of, indirectly?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because, that's exactly what happens in these circumstances. When you start asking more questions, you get answers back that you weren't expecting and you don't know what to do with initially. I definitely say don't ignore answers that kind of open up new realms. For us, as I'd already alluded to, the well-being of traders, perhaps we didn't have as much hard data on, and this path of Zishi Adaptive and the project with UCL has led to new campaigns within the business. So we really do have a massive drive at the moment on well-being. We've employed a well-being specialist within the company. So, it's matured, I think, OSTC in terms of the way we respond to the needs of our employees. We're all working from home pretty much at the moment, so everybody's had to make big adjustments lately, and I think checking in with people and that reassurance, coming back to the reassurance of what you're doing with data, but just reassurance that everyone's best interests are being kept at heart of the process is important.
Yeah, and I might add that whenever collecting data, so for example, if administering a survey, we must have an informed consent. That means that people are knowing exactly why you're collecting the data and what you're going to do with that. So for example, if we are going to use that data for the AI, it should be clear to them, and they should trust that you would use it just for the AI and not for any kind of organizational internal systems or evaluation or something like that. It's really
I think it all harks back to the culture of your business. You know, if
exactly.
your employees trust you, then that's the foundation that you need really to explore AI further, I think.
It really always goes down to that. One question I wanted to ask you, as a global company, you have offices in many countries which are very, very different in their culture, and not just language. How do you think that would affect the data that you're collecting, and then maybe the models, the AI models, when people are coming from such different cultures? I mean, in the sense of, you know, how do they look at the essence of giving their data, and how do they look at the essence of their data being used, and also whether the data is contextually very, very different and will tell you very different things.
Interesting. So we've always been aware that as a global business, the culture will vary from location to location. And you even see that in trading activity. So the style of trading, the products that we would trade vary from office to office. And so we've always been conscious of the differences and how that would reflect in the data. I think the jury is still out in some respects in terms of how it will help shape, for example, the mentoring tool that we're really focusing on at the moment, whether those variances in culture and things need to be accounted for. You can't just have a one sort of size fits all approach to it. I think certainly in terms of data collection, there were fewer problems than I expected when it came to you know, the difference in language and culture, because I think perhaps we work mainly with numbers. That helped somewhat, but yeah, it wasn't as big an obstacle, I think, as I perhaps first feared it would be.
One of the challenges that I think we had right from the beginning of the project was that because there are different offices and different cultures, etc., all kinds of processes like recruitment and other kind of processes weren't very standardized across offices, and that's a big problem for AI, because you need to collect data in as much as possible in the same context to get some conclusions.
Yeah, sure. So the recruitment process did vary from location to location, but I think what the process helped us understand is that although the activities did vary slightly in each office's recruitment process, they weren't drastically different. And I think helping to come to a more, as you say, standard process of recruitment, so that the data was fairly reflected from place to place. It's not been, like I say, it's challenging. I think people have been very open to understanding how the process might have varied in other locations and learning from that. And that's been a benefit of this entire process, is that different regions have really had more insight into the way it's done elsewhere, and you're able to take the best bits from other locations
Right. Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. We did have different ideas coming from different people, and that was amazing. Thank you so much. It was really joy to have you here. I think I need to remind us what's next. So we would continue with this series of webinars, and we will take us all through steps 5, 6, and 7 in the ethical readiness framework. And if you want to find out anything more about this process, please email help@educateventures. Anything from you, Roland?
Yeah, help@educateventures.com. Yeah, and we've got the next set of webinars that I've just linked to in the chat. So Carmel, you're going to be speaking to Carmen Miles from Ardent University, and Teresa Raffaeli Shazaf from Haifa University in Israel. And that's going to be applicable for both educators and businesses, isn't it?
We will talk about AI techniques for 2 webinars because it's really a very wide topic. So we would cover that in 2 different webinars, which would be, I think, relevant for both educational businesses and teachers and educators. Yeah.
Awesome. Right. Thanks very much, Hannah, for coming along. Thank you very much, Carmel.
Thank you.
And for everybody else, as I said, put the link in there. But we've also, if you follow us on Eventbrite or Twitter, we'll be linking to the webinars frequently. And you can always visit our website, www.educateventures.com. We've got the latest events up there for you as well. So thank you very much. And I'm going to exit 3 minutes early, and hope to see you soon. Take care, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.